Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Harlan, and I am very excited to be here today to share my research with everyone. Today, I'll be talking about a topic which I think is somewhat relevant to today's date. I'll be talking about cannabis legalization and taxation, and specifically the effects that these legalization and taxation of cannabis have had on the black market growth and sale in California. Awesome. So just a bit of background. Recreational cannabis was legalized in California back in 2016, and advocates wanted to say that it would increase state revenues, implement quality control and regulations, and most of all, eliminate the black market. However, in California, especially in Los Angeles, there's still a large amount of unregulated cannabis, and the black market is still not gone yet, which sparked my research questions, which include first of all, why is the illicit market still so prevalent? And what changes should be implemented in order to eliminate this black market? And finally, the social implications. What are the socio-political and socio-economic implications of having a black market cannabis still existent in California? So my objectives are to assess the regulatory landscape which has allowed the illicit cannabis black market to persist in California following legalization. I first started by examining the size of the illegal and legal cannabis markets to first prove with data that the illicit cannabis market was certainly still robust in California. After showing this, I hypothesized that recreational cannabis or recreational legal cannabis was very expensive, largely due to the taxes that were imposed by state governments. So I looked at the tax on the production and sale of cannabis in Los Angeles. And last and most recently, I've been looking into trying to geotag locations of as many unlicensed dispensaries as I can find in Los Angeles in order to try to find a trend, perhaps, because if recreational legal cannabis is too expensive to purchase, then it would make sense that there is a correlation between larger amounts of unlicensed dispensaries and a lower socioeconomic standing. These are one of my preliminary results. Although it's been difficult to find good reputable data sources on how large the illicit cannabis market is in California, I think this is enough evidence to show that the illicit market certainly still is robust and shows no sign of declining or diminishing without some kind of regulatory action. And to back this up, I looked into how cannabis was taxed in Los Angeles specifically, because it's taxed differently depending on the region or city you're in. First of all, it's a three-tier tax system, starting with a local cannabis tax of 11% on the subtotal. This is an 11% tax on your list item prices. Next, a California state excise tax of 15% is then added on top of the subtotal, the local cannabis tax, and a delivery if a delivery service is used. This is where I believe some problems may begin, because the state excise tax compounds on top of the local cannabis tax. Lastly, an LA sales tax of 9.5% is applied on everything bought in LA, and this third tier of tax is levied on top of both tiers of taxes. So you have three tiers of taxes, all of which compound on one another and add on to one another. And at the very end, the final tax rate for recreational cannabis comes out to around 40 to 45%, which is pretty exorbitant in my opinion. This is the point where I like to ask the audience to consider any kind of thing that they use or buy on a regular basis, which is taxed at 40 to 45%. And this is a map where I've geotagged as many unlicensed dispensaries as I could find in LA. Now, I want to add that this map is far from complete, but already a trend is beginning to show where we see concentrations or higher concentrations of unlicensed dispensaries. A previous study showed that there were more or higher concentration of unlicensed dispensaries in communities of color. And I wanted to look at whether or not this was correlated to communities with lower socioeconomic standing, because these communities are already communities which have much higher rates of chronic and preventable diseases. And with unlicensed cannabis, it's very possible that this is not regulated and not quality controlled. So if weed is grown illegally, it can be sprayed with pesticides. And if these pesticides are then ingested by the user, this can cause a huge public health problem further down the line. Not to mention that distillates use solvents to remove cannabinoids and terpenes, and solvents such as benzene, if not removed well, are carcinogenic. And we saw a problem with this with vitamin E acetate a couple of years ago, where over a dozen teens died in our state due to vitamin E acetate. So this is already a problem that we're beginning to see in a public health issue that is already beginning to rear its head. And I think this is a very, very interesting map. It begins to show the social, economic, and political implications of a black market in cannabis that still exists. So some preliminary conclusions. First of all, it's very clear that the illicit cannabis market is still robust, large, and prominent. It's not going anywhere without some kind of regulatory action. I believe that this is due to tax rates being extremely high, largely due to the three-tier system, largely due to the taxes which compound on one another, causing these tax rates to be so high. And lastly, I think it's very important to consider the fact that these tax rates and these policies affect those of lower socioeconomic standing the most. These communities are ones that have been long and historically over-criminalized and over-policed for the use and possession of cannabis. And they are the ones who are going to bear the brunt of this ongoing public health problem that is going to be exacerbated by such a tax system. The next steps of my project, first of all, I really want to continue searching for as many unlicensed dispensaries as possible. I want to try to make that map, that trend, as clear as possible, and I want to make the correlation as strong as possible. I think it'd be really, really interesting to overlay two more maps on top of that. One which maps out the legal dispensaries in Los Angeles to show perhaps the opposite correlation, where there are more legal dispensaries in areas of higher socioeconomic standing. Likewise, I think a heat map showing income or socioeconomic wealth across Los Angeles could be overlaid on top of both maps and could really help to strengthen my conclusion. Lastly, I think that my results have shown that the current taxation model for cannabis in California is unsustainable. And it shows that perhaps this taxation model is one that is driven by profit, not by quality control or regulatory control. And with cannabis being federally, on the cusp of being federally legalized, it is very likely that the federal government is looking towards states like California to create their taxation model. And so to conclude this project, I would like to try to think of some potential solutions to this taxation model, because if this is already a problem in California on this scale, if the federal government were to adopt a similar taxation model, it is very likely we will see a similar problem at a much larger scale. So thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Sure. Just wondering what the implications are if you also consider THC Delta 8, Delta 10, and others that are totally unregulated. How does that interface with legal, illegal THC Delta 9 markets?
That's a great question. So I like that you brought up Delta 8 because Delta 8 is technically legal, right? And can be bought much more easily, actually. The reasons why I haven't looked into other products like Delta 8 or other derivatives of cannabis are simply because of project scope. I wanted to start by looking at the entire state, but once I even got to the taxation model, I realized there are so many different taxation percentages in the way taxes are calculated across California. There is no way that I could do all of this throughout the entire state. So this is when I began to focus on Los Angeles and focus specifically on cannabis flower and cannabis distillates. So oils and cartridges, and these are usually products that you'll find in a legal dispensary.
Hey, great talk and really good research questions. I was wondering how you found the unlicensed dispensaries with your methods.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that question. So, right, this was the map of the unlicensed dispensaries, right? I started by looking for as many dispensaries as I could, just from search engines, And the Department of Cannabis Control in California actually has a licensed search engine where you can put in input the name of the dispensary or the address or even the license number if you have a license number, and it will spit back all the information that the Department of Cannabis Control has. So basically, if I find a lot of dispensaries and I put in their addresses and no license gets spit back, then it's very likely this is an unlicensed dispensary. And I can also double check that by going there on site and visiting it in person, because lots of legal dispensaries have to sell cannabis in prepackaged jars. A lot of dispensaries in Los Angeles have the bud tender weigh out flower or whatever you're buying right in front of you, and that is actually completely illegal. So if any dispensary does do that, that is a clear sign of an unlicensed dispensary.
One more.
Really nice presentation, thank you. I was wondering if you could comment on home deliveries and how that, I don't know, might throw a wrench in this at all, or how that might influence some of the geographical associations that you're looking at, because I know that particularly during COVID, home deliveries have increased in popularity.
Yeah, deliveries are a great question. A lot of delivery services that you'll find tend to be licensed, especially if they're found off of sites such as Leafly or Weed Maps. Those are the two most popular websites for searching for these. Both those websites actually came under fire by the government a couple of years back for pushing unlicensed dispensaries. So if you were to go onto those sites and look for delivery service nowadays, you are getting licensed cannabis. There's no worry about that. The concern would be smaller delivery operations, perhaps, right? Or things you hear from friends or whatever. That cannabis is not regulated, and you have no idea what the supply chain, how far down the supply chain, right, that comes from. The other thing about delivery is in the taxation model, the delivery fee is baked into the taxation model. You can see from the state excise tax of 15%, that is on the delivery as well. So if you have an expensive delivery fee, guess what? The delivery fee is taxed as well. So I like you brought up delivery. Thank you very much for bringing that up. Thank you.